All right, let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Oxplore Book Club live event for November. My name is Sam. I'm a third-year engineering student at University College here in Oxford, and I'll be your student presenter for today. Just before we get started, just need to go over a few little logistical things. Firstly, can we ask that all attendees please keep your video off and your audio on mute throughout the session? This is important so we can run everything smoothly, but also because we're recording the session and fingers crossed we'll be sharing it on our YouTube channel at a later date. Additionally, please watch in speaker view to get the best viewing experience. We've got a very exciting session planned today discussing the Revelry by Katherine Webber, who we are delighted to have with us today, here to answer your questions. So attendees, please do send in your ideas and questions via the Zoom chat feature, and we will ask those to Katherine. The most thought-provoking question that we have submitted today will win another one of Katherine's books, Wing Jones, and we're going to contact the lucky winner of that by the end of the week. So, Katherine, would you please like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you, Sam, for that great welcome. One other logistical thing for anyone who's joining us, I have a 1-year-old who, due to a childcare snafu, is here, so she might be popping up, or if you hear a small child in the background, that is what that is. So I'm Katherine Webber. I am a YA author as well as a middle grade author. I'm originally from California. I've been living in London for 9 years. And before this, I lived in Hong Kong for 4 years. My debut YA novel, Wing Jones, came out in 2017. And since then, I have published 3 solo YA novels, as well as about 12 middle grade novels that I co-write with my husband, Kevin Sang, as Katie sang. And then this year, in addition to publishing the Revelry, I also published Twin Crowns, which is a YA fantasy rom-com that I co-wrote with author Catherine Doyle. The Revelry, though, is really a heart book for me. This book took me 5 years to write. We can discuss that a little bit more. And I loved writing a book about female friendship. Those are kind of, it has a lot of the themes that I gravitate to in my solo writing. And when I'm not writing, I am wrangling I have a 1-year-old as well as a 3.5-year-old. And I try to read as much as I can.
Fantastic. So, Katherine, you said that how long have you been an author for now? And at what point did you realize that being an author is, what you wanted to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I am 35 now, and I signed with my literary agent when I was 27, and my first book came out when I was 29. So that's like, 6 years ago? For anyone who's not familiar with the kind of traditional publishing, you need a literary agent to have if you don't want to self-publish your book, you want to be published by a mainstream publisher, have your books in Waterstones and that kind of thing. I wanted to be a writer for as long as I can remember, but for a long time, it felt like an unachievable dream, like saying, I want to be an Olympic athlete, or I want to be a famous movie star. It just seemed like something that was really unachievable. And then, I've always been a big fan of books and reading and writing my own stories. And it was really in my mid-20s. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to give this a go. I researched how to get published, and I wrote a book. I was so proud of myself. It took me 3 years. And I read it back and it was terrible. So I put that in a drawer and I was like, nope, that book's not going anywhere. And then I wrote another book and it was a little bit better. And I sent this book out to 60 literary agents and I got 60 rejections. So I wrote another book and I sent that one out. And I also, again, got loads of rejections. And it was when I wrote what would become my debut. I ended up with 10 offers from literary agents. The book sold at auction. Enabled me to be able to write full time. So I share that just because I really want to encourage the aspiring writers, don't give up. My existing agent, who I love, rejected me twice before she signed me, which I frequently remind her of. So it was definitely something that I was going to keep going and keep trying. A lot of it depends on persistence and also luck. You have no idea the book that you're writing, if it'll resonate with, kind of the people who are making those decisions. And since then, I've been really fortunate and been able to write lots of different books for readers, in different age ranges. But I really love YA. YA is kind of my favorite place to read and write.
Fantastic. So I guess building on what you were talking about a little bit earlier, what would you say is your main piece of advice to any of the young writers that we may have in the audience today?
First of all, if you're finding any time to write while going to school, well done on you. I know you guys have a lot of pressure and not a lot of time. I would just say, read as much as you can. And also when you're reading, obviously read for pleasure and enjoyment, but start paying attention to kind of like what resonates with you and why. Like thinking like, oh, am I drawn to, thrillers? Am I drawn to fantasy? What do I think works well? Do I like multi-POV? And also kind of thinking where you think only you can write the story that you can write. So think kind of, what unique perspective could you bring to something? Is there something that you've always wanted to write about that you're not seeing as much? Is there something that you would like to do your own twist on? And then, get in the practice of finishing things. So whether that's finishing just chapters or a short story, because, an idea is always the most fun part. And then sitting down and actually, committing that to a full book is the hardest. So just, don't give up. And then even if you've written a full book, that's incredible. And if that one doesn't land you your agent or your book deal, still celebrate that because it's a huge achievement. And then just keep going, much like I did. So yeah, persistence and paying attention to reading and, what you think and what you like, and just reading lots and kind of soaking up stories.
Fantastic. So moving on a little bit more to the Revelry, just briefly, what were some of your main inspirations behind writing this book?
So this book, I'm assuming anyone who's joined us maybe has read it or is familiar with the concept. Should I pitch the book or a reminder?
I think maybe a little brief summary, just a very quick one. I think nearly everyone in our audience should have read the book though.
Amazing. So The Revelry is a book at its core about female friendship. It is about, here's this beautiful cover. I love the cover so much. It's about two best friends who go to a mysterious party in the woods. And after they go, things are not as they were. And it kind of secrets start to spill out and their friendship begins to kind of unravel. It's told from the perspective of one of the friends, Bitsy, and she needs to figure out what happened at the Revelry and how it's impacting her and her best friend Amy's friendship. And I really wanted to ask the question of, what would you be willing to do for your best friend or someone you cared about? What would you give up? I am fortunate, especially considering what in an industry I work in with so many wildly talented people. I don't struggle loads with jealousy. I have some close friends, specifically from high school, who really do. And I think it's a really interesting concept. I remember I was talking to a friend of mine and something good had happened to one of our other friends and she felt like it had been taken from her. And that made no sense. I was like, this good thing happening to them, like, it's not like a zero-sum game, but I do think it can feel like that sometimes. And I was intrigued in that idea. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get to that concept. So the best friends are always there. Bitsy and Amy were there from the start when I first started writing this book. But figuring out, was it, how fantastical did I want to make it? What was the mechanism for, why they started to feel like their lives were on kind of a luck balance? My first draft of this was in third person and it involved a tricksy sea god, kind of like a Loki character who put a much more obvious curse on the girls. And my editor was like, this is way too fantastical. Throw it back. So I went back and I completely rewrote the entire thing. And then I took out almost all the magic and there was like kind of like wild pyromaniac murderer, trying to set rights in the world and trying to prove to Amy that things weren't equal. And that she was like, this has also gone completely off track. Try it again. So I rewrote this book start to finish. And I did it again. She's like, all right, you're getting closer. You're getting closer. Start to finish 5 times. So it took me a really long time.
Wow.
But yeah, just that concept of, jealousy and luck and how it can feel like when everything's going well for someone else and not for you and how that manifests. But, ultimately at the end of the day, I wanted it to be a celebration of strong friendship and, being there when things get tough. And I also wanted to make it so the girls weren't fighting over like a love interest. I think you can have complex, frustrating friendship dynamics that aren't a lot of times in YA fiction. You see that, which is great. I have no, problem with that. I think that's a really fun trope to explore, but it was important to me that they weren't kind of fighting over like a love interest. So yeah, that was kind of where the initial inspiration was there, from just wanting this desire to write about complicated friendships and how those kind of can manifest. And then, introduce the idea of what if it really was happening? Like, what if something good happening to someone else really was taking away, good things to you? What would you do? How would you react to that? What would you, want to give up? So yeah, sorry, long-winded answer there.
Fantastic answer. So we're going to open the floor to some of the questions from our audience now. And again, just a reminder, if you do have any questions, do pop them in the chat. So the first question is going to come from Sir Henry Floyd Grammar School. And what they want to know is, having lived in various different countries, how have you found that's impacted how you create your characters and your storylines?
That's a really interesting question. My first two YA books take place in real cities. My first one takes place in Atlanta, Georgia, which is somewhere I lived. And my second one takes place in Palm Springs, California, which is somewhere I spent a lot of my childhood. It's where my grandparents live and where I was married. But Revelry actually takes place in a fully fictional town. And that was a little bit of a struggle for me because I realized I kind of lent heavily on being able to like look at a map and think about the descriptions for a real place that I knew really well. And I had an editor who literally said to me, what is in the town of Ember Grove? Because the town plays a really important part. And I was like, I don't know. She's like, you can't just have the woods and the school. Like, there need to be other things in this kind of creepy cafe. And I was like, oh my goodness, you're right. So I literally sat down and drew out a map. Like, this is where a movie theater would be. This is where a library would be. This is where, the vintage stores are. I apologize for my shrieking child. So I drew a map, which really helped me kind of develop it. And in terms of, look, you're on. That's you. Yeah. In terms of where I get inspiration from where I've lived, absolutely. Like I said, specifically for my earlier ones. But I don't ever think like, oh, this is right for an American audience. This is right for a British audience. I try to write from kind of a universal perspective. And I've been lucky to have got to travel a lot, to see different places.
Fantastic. And I guess on a bit of a related note to that question, one question that I had actually was the Ember Grove and the woods. Are they, is there somewhere that you've lived perhaps or you've visited that formed some of the initial inspirations for that? Or is it, again, like you said, they're just completely from a creation of your own mind?
So I love magical woods. I currently live in North London, which has a lot of incredible woods. We have the Heath right here, Highgate Wood. But growing up in Southern California, I didn't have loads of woods kind of in my backyard, but I think I always liked the idea of it. So there's just something to me that's really inspirational and kind of alluring about woods. Although, interestingly enough, in my very first drafts of the Revelry, it took place mostly on the coastline. So that's why, and this one, that's why in the current draft, there is a lake and there's a coastline, because I still wanted there to be that, but there wasn't kind of the sea. So that the woods kind of came apart around maybe my second or third draft, but I think there's something really eerie and magical, about, going into woods and kind of your eyes can play tricks on you and the shadows can shift and change. So kind of that the woods themselves were very much something that I wanted to write about, and I really enjoyed writing about. I could have just written Bitsy exploring in the woods, like just that. And then as far as the town itself, I really like the idea of this kind of small, claustrophobic feeling town, that things are a little bit different, a little of I like the idea of, feeling like the trees themselves are listening, and that there's, kind of heavy fog that kind of rolls in. Stay here in Ember Grove, or do you want to get out? And like what, the explore kind of how a small town can be kind of stifling, and how it can be hard for someone like Amy, Bitsy's best friend, who comes in and Bitsy is frequently telling her, oh, you're not a real Ember Grove girl. And that didn't really come from any personal experience, but just kind of an interesting concept, kind of adding to the layered kind of differences between Bitsy and Amy and their friendship.
Fantastic. So I guess on a bit of a related note, a question from Solon is that, so you said that, for example, Amy and Bitsy aren't based perfectly on real people, but what are some of the bits of the Revelry that are based on your personal experience, if any?
Yeah, I think, I really thought about like being a teenager and being in high school, the stuff that happens to Bitsy and kind of when the quote curse starts to take effect. Thinking about what I would have found really embarrassing and stressful. Everywhere, anytime I write a book set in a contemporary world, the high school always looks like my high school. Like, that's just always how it is. Like, I have a really hard time like breaking free of that like mental scope of like what my high school looks like. In terms of the girls themselves, I wouldn't say they're based on any one person in particular, but I definitely had very intense friendships in high school. I still have really strong friendships, and something that I've learned as an adult that I wish I knew as a teenager, and I kind of wanted to like impart in the book. And it's something that I think Grandma Shirley, she says, people good friend differently. Like you might think being a good friend means like hanging out all the time, talking on the phone, whereas you could have a friend who thinks being a good friend is just responding to text messages or sending gifts on your birthday. And I think something that really helps friendship is recognizing, oh, this person is, maybe I think they're being a bad friend, but they're just actually good friending in a different way than I'm used to. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Thank you. So another question which I had, and is one thing I noticed in the book, is that you have all these sort of themes of magic. Ember Grove is a very like superstition laden place, but also it's very much, like you said, a modern setting. There's people have phones, there's lots of tech conversations over text. I'm quite interested, sort of, what did you find were some of the challenges of like getting, I guess, the technology and the magic to gel together nicely in the narrative?
Such a good question, because, oh my goodness, technology is like the worst for fiction, because you're like, why wouldn't you just look it up on your phone? Couldn't you just use Find My Friends? So I make it that, at the Revelry, I just say there are no phones, no one takes photos. I think they bring their phone in to use as a flashlight, because that actually is one thing with the woods. If anyone's ever been in the woods at night, it is very, very actually quite dark. Like you need to be able to see. And there's a bit too where Bitsy is trying to look up things about the Revelry, and it's just Google is just not working. And those are kind of, I wanted to put in a little bit kind of like weird, creepy rules about things, or when she tries to email her older brother about it, the email just gets a bounce back. And so the only place that she's able to go to find out about Revelry's past, and kind of people who've died in her town around the time of Revelry's, is her local library. Because I really like that kind of tangible feel of her going back and looking at research. It's also much more interesting to read about instead of reading about someone like scrolling online. So part of it was kind of intuition and what I thought would work, and part of it was just logistically what I thought would be more interesting to read about. But no, that's a great question. You have to figure out ways to get rid of the phone, get rid of people being able to text each other and find each other.
Fantastic. So question from Kanzi is about Skylar and some of perhaps, a bit of the backstory behind Skylar, and particularly without giving much of a spoiler towards the end, why specifically a fox?
Yeah, so no, I realized the end kind of you're like, this book has just gotten increasingly bananas. Skylar in my original draft, like I said, the role that Skylar played was this tricksy sea god. And then I shifted it and it was a male character. And then an editor, I know I keep referencing my editors, but I've had brilliant editors with this book who really helped me shift it. Again, the heart was always Bitsy and Amy. It was always this kind of sort of magical curse about female friendship. But the everything else changed quite a bit in different drafts. One of my editors said, I think it'd be much more interesting if you made the Skylar character a girl and have her slightly older. And as we find out, she's actually much, much older. But that's interesting to kind of add an additional element of, oh, I have a new friend. I have a cool friend. I have a friend who sees me how I want to be seen. And that's another thing I really like exploring, that idea of, how you see yourself, how other people see you, and how you want to be seen. I think as a teenager, that's really shifting. And I think that's also can be kind of a struggle sometimes with like your parents. Your parents are like, oh, but don't you remember when you were 10, you threw a fit because you were so excited about your chocolate cake? And you're like, I've outgrown that. But it can be really hard to shake, how your family and how people who've known you your whole life can see you. And kind of Bitsy has this refrain, like, I'm Bitsy Clark, I'm a good girl, but she wants to be seen as interesting and fascinating. And Skylar makes her feel like that. One of the things I wanted to be really careful about doing was that I wasn't queer baiting. I definitely think there is like space for that kind of story. But I want to make it clear that Bitsy wasn't attracted to Skylar, or, that there was just this kind of like fascinating, like this purely platonic fascination and obsession that I definitely had, especially when I was a bit younger. I would see these glamorous, upperclassmen. I just wanted to be them. And I wanted to kind of explore that and have Bitsy feel like that about Skylar. And why a fox? I just was thinking the whole time I was writing Skylar, she really felt like a fox to me. Like even before I knew how I was going to deal with the ending, because I knew something had to happen to her. And I was like, I can't have Bitsy like straight up murder her. Like that would be wild. So I was like, I can't just have her like vaguely disappear, into the mist. Like I wanted it to be real, and I wanted it to feel, add something really, and have it related to the woods. And I was like, foxes live in woods. And she just felt kind of like if she was going to be any animal, it felt like a fox.
Fantastic. So our next question comes from Downs End School, and what they want to know is, in the book, who is your favorite character and why?
I love writing Skylar. Skylar's so fun. I loved writing, just again, kind of like what I was saying, I just found her really interesting. I like kind of exploring. She's a bit mean. It's always fun to write a bit of a mean character. The bits that I found the hardest were the fights between Bitsy and Amy. I really didn't like making them be really mean to each other, but I wanted to feel authentic. I like Skylar. I love Bitsy's grandma Shirley. I love writing grandparent characters. I find it much easier than writing parent characters. And Chanterelle, who runs Chanterelle's Cafe. I really enjoyed. I want to do a whole backstory novella just on her. So yeah, I like side characters tend to be a little more fun because you can make them a little bit weirder and more interesting. Whereas with your main character, you're like, oh, what are their wants and needs? And what are they thinking about? Which make them harder to write.
Fantastic. So for our next question, we're going to go on to something a bit more sort of writing crafty. And again, this is from Henry Floyd Grammar School. How do you deal with, I guess, the perception of especially other writers and how they see your work? Because obviously one of the challenges of being a writer and, putting so much into something and then putting out in the open is that obviously you are going to have, but that was a mix of positive and negative reviews.
That's so great. Great question. I'm really fortunate in that I have a very vibrant, supportive, wonderful community of writer friends in London, and that we all write together and we read each other's work early and we support each other. So if any of my writer friends don't like my books, they've never told me. But and in terms of reviews from general, and it's actually really scary though, sending a book to a friend, especially if you really admire them. Crystal Sutherland, who's an author who wrote House of Hollow, which is one of my favorite books. She's one of my all-time favorite people, but I was scared to send her Revelry because I'm like, oh, I hope she thinks it's good. I hope she likes it. Holly Bourne, who writes brilliantly about female friendship, also is very supportive and gave me a wonderful endorsement. Louise O'Neill, all these authors that I really admire. It's really quite terrifying sending them your work. But it's a very supportive community. I don't go on Goodreads for my own mental health. Readers are entitled to their own opinions. I do read any kind of trade reviews, and if I'm tagged in things on Instagram, I always like to see that. Although it is hilarious when someone will give me a 2-star review, take a beautiful picture of the book, and then I'm like, guys, don't tag me in your 2-star reviews. I don't need to see it. But I think you just have to know that everyone is entitled to their own opinion, and everyone is, different things, different books are going to resonate with different people. But of course I get the fear of sharing my work with writers that I admire, but luckily it's a very supportive community.
Thank you for that. And on a sort of related note, a question from Blenheim, which is, what is, do you think, the most challenging thing about writing a book from your experience?
Honestly, just butt in chair, words on the page. I mean, you guys are getting a little bit of insight into the chaos of my life with 2 young children. I wish there were more hours in the day. But when you have an idea, you can really picture it perfectly. It's almost like if you wanted to be able to draw and you're like, okay, I'm going to draw this incredible mountain scene, and you can picture it perfectly. You want the mountains to look like, you want the sunset to look like. And then you sit down and trying to actually translate that from your brain onto the with your paint feels very similar to me for writing. I can really picture what I want the book to be, but actually getting it there is really hard. So I think just, knowing that your first draft is always going to need work and it's not going to be perfect, and dealing with that frustration of the perfect book you have in your head versus getting it onto the page is always really difficult. And again, it's just time management. And what I always say to people is, if you write 200 words a day, in a week, in 5 days, you'll have 1,000 words, and in 50 weeks, you'll have 50,000 words. And people are like, but that's 50 weeks. I'm like, yeah, but if you don't do 200 words a day, then you won't, at the end of 50 weeks, you won't have anything. So just, whether that means for you writing little and often, maybe it means spending a few hours every week. And, you're the only person who can prioritize your writing time. And so when I still had a full-time day job, I was trying to fit writing around my life. I would miss out on doing things with my friends, or I would wake up early, or I would write my lunch break. You have to be the one who's in charge of making that writing time, protecting it. So I would just really encourage any writers to protect your writing time and to prioritize it. And even if you're, if it feels slow, you are making progress, I promise.
Very good advice. Thank you. So we're going to pivot back a little bit to more questions on the Revelry. And our next question from the chat from Downton School is, where did you get the idea for the title and I guess the name of the whole sort of ceremony?
That's a great question, man. I really struggled with this title for this book a lot. The first was called The Silver Thread because I had the girls kind of bound by this like magical ethereal silver thread. My editor was like, title doesn't make sense. And then I had something called like a Gathering Rising Darkness, which like also it's kind of vague. But I always called the Revelry. And my editor again was like, we should just call it the Revelry. And I was unsure at first. I was like, I don't know. It's kind of a weird word. Maybe not everyone knows what it means. And it's just kind of the inciting incident. Like it felt like if I'd written a murder mystery and someone was shot with a gun, calling it like the gun. Like I was like, I don't know, is it? But then, I think it was a genius title suggestion. I think because it's I think a very cool sounding word, and it kind of invites, I like how inviting it is, like come to the Revelry, like, the Revelry is tonight. Will you go to the Revelry? And then once we had the title nailed down, I went back and really wove in the importance of the Revelry in Ember Grove and gave it a history. I think at one point it wasn't like an annual thing, it was just the party and something happened. And then once I knew how pivotal it was going to be, I went back and wove that in. But great question.
Thank you. Our next question is from Liam at the Cotswold School. And what he wants to know is, what's the importance of the living room in the woods that starts to appear about halfway through the novel?
Oh, I love that question. So used to be as in the woods, there is this living room that kind of pops up. I wanted the book to feel like real and in contemporary time, but also magical. And I was just like, how kind of creepy, cool, weird would that be to all of a sudden discover this living room in the woods and have it feel kind of like magical, but also very mundane, and kind of feel like meant for Bitsy. I wanted Bitsy to feel like the woods were her woods and they belonged to her, and even to the point of this magical space. And again, just logistically, I needed somewhere for them to hang out in the woods that wasn't just like on a tree stump. So it helped.
Thank you very much. So the next question is actually from Woodbridge School, and they want to know, is there any significance to Chanterelle shop selling snake brains?
Yeah, just snake hearts. Yes, I wanted it to be, again, like, on one hand side, it just kind of looks like a standard sort of a little bit hippie cafe coffee shop. She does tea readings, and the shop feels really magical. But then I wanted her to sell stuff that could actually feasibly feel like it could be used in kind of doing spells and potions. And so, you're like, okay, we're selling our lavender tea, but we also have snake hearts. And again, I could do a whole novella just about Chanterelle and the things that she sells in her shop.
Fantastic. Another quick question from Kanzi is about particularly the name Bitsy, because that's quite an unusual name. Yeah. How did you arrive at that name for your protagonist?
That is a great question. So my Bitsy is short for Elizabeth, and I have an aunt Elizabeth. And when she used to be called Bitsy, and I grew up calling her Aunt Bitsy, and I really liked it. I like that it feels kind of unique and distinctive. I think it kind of is a memorable name. It kind of like for me, character names kind of like get stuck in my brain. And so it was definitely inspired. Now I call my aunt Liz. Liz is also short for Elizabeth, but I remember just as a child calling her Aunt Bitsy, and I just thought it was an interesting, and there's something kind of to me like vintagey almost about it. And so that was inspired by her. And then I was like, oh, and then kind of adding layering to it. It would be so frustrating if you were called Bitsy, which implies kind of small, and if you were like a taller or bigger girl, like Bitsy is, and how she finds that frustrating. And again, trying to like kind of shake how everyone sees her. Like she doesn't want to be big bits, like she wants to be someone glamorous, and she's it just feels frustrating, kind of hemmed in on all sides, like even her own name. But yeah, great question.
Lovely. So our next question comes from Jude, and what they want to know is, do you feel like in the book all friendships change after the Revelry? Is it a bit of a is there a bit of a metaphor behind it in terms of personal growth? How do you feel?
Love that. I love that. I think so. I think I think why parties are fun to write about in YA fiction, and why, in so many coming of age, teen movies and teen fiction, is because they represent a shift. Like, it's a graduation party because we are changing now from being students to graduates. Prom night, it will be, it's this shift of like, this is maybe a magical night where something can happen, and before and after. And so I think it's that's why people kind of tend to write about these like big key events. And I definitely think the Revelry is representative of kind of like going from, teenagehood into adulthood. Will you leave Ember Grove? Are you going to find out? You're going to find out things about your town that maybe you didn't want to know. You're going to see yourself differently. So I absolutely think that anyone who went to the Revelry would be changed by it. Absolutely. Whether, and with Bitsy and Amy, it was their friendship because that was such an important part of who they were. But I think, it would impact different people attending in different ways.
Thank you very much. So another question from Blenheim in the chat is about, you mentioned that, again, a lot of rejections in the process of, just in general with entering the literary world. What were some of the things that like kept you going through that and helped you power through?
I had a lot of cake, cried in the shower sometimes. No, it was just something I wanted so much. And I was like, I'm going to give this my best shot. And I do think that my writing improved as I kept writing. I said that first book that I wrote in my early 20s and then shelved that. And a lot of people, that's not like shade on people who write when they're young. I'm very good friends with the author Samantha Shannon, who went to Oxford, and she wrote her book when she was, I think, 18, 19. But I was just, perfecting my writing craft. Such like an obnoxious, I was perfecting the craft, but I really think I was, getting better and better and kind of finding my own writing voice. But that said, every time I sit down to write a book, I'm like, have I done this before? Is it always this hard? And then at the end, I'm like, oh yeah, I did that, no problem. So I think the thing that kept me going was just, I wanted it so badly. And also I love the actual act of writing. Like, the goal was to be published, but I loved the writing too. And I think that's the thing. I think you're a writer if you write. Regardless of whether you have a literary agent or a book deal, if you are writing, you are a writer. My toddler agrees.
Fantastic. So one more question. In terms of, obviously, we're focused on very much the teenagers, but there are plenty of adults in Ember Grove. And why, maybe some thoughts on how you kind of intended to play them, and, and especially how they treat the younger people in their lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny when you're writing a teen book, or even writing, like I said, I write middle grade fiction, so young fiction, the grown-ups are always a problem. You're like, okay, how are we going to make it so, if I write young adventure books about kids discovering dragons. I'm like, right, how are we going to make it so the kids can save the day? And then if you're looking at the Revelry, we're like, how am I going to do this really like illicit party where like people literally die without people coming in and stopping it? So, you have to figure out, and unless you're setting your book, in like a dystopian future at a boarding school, there are going to be adults, in that world. And I wanted to make sure they felt fleshed out characters as well, which is why, again, I really enjoyed writing Grandma Shirley and writing Chanterelle. And so I think just, wanting the town to feel realistic, and have, fully fleshed out characters from the teen characters to the adults. And again, kind of that theme of like Bitsy feeling not understood, with the exception of her grandmother, because that's someone who was so important to her life, and kind of who she goes to for wisdom and for comfort. So that was, again, a relationship I really enjoyed exploring. But mostly you're just trying to get the adults out of the picture so you can get on with the adventure and the plot. And I think actually, when you are a teenager, you do want to live your own life really, independently, and with good reason.
Awesome. And we're just going to have one last question, which is, what is your favorite part of the book, if you had to pick one?
I love the Revelry itself. And a fun fact, when I first wrote it, I know I keep talking about how it took me so long, but it truly did. Actually, we were at the Revelry at the beginning, so everyone saw what happened. And my editor said, I think you should make it more of a mystery. I think you should space it out and have it unclear what actually happened, and have Bitsy trying to figure it out along with the reader. One thing with that I was really careful of, I wanted to make it very clear that there was no kind of like assault or anything that had happened. She wakes up with no memory. I wanted to make sure that the reader knew that I wasn't kind of trying to trick them, and it wasn't that kind of book. Again, there's definitely space for those kind of books. But this was not that, what I wasn't exploring that topic. I love writing the Revelry, and I love writing. There's a scene where Fitzy and Skylar are swimming in Lake Lost that I really loved writing. And I love writing when the girls at the beginning, when they're getting ready for the Revelry and they're getting ready together, because that's something I remember so much from being in high school and something I still love doing with my friends. It feels almost like a ritual of like, doing each other's makeup, doing each other's hair, like, checking each other's outfit. So I really enjoy writing that. Basically anything that's not plot. I just like vibes. That's my favorite thing to write.
Thank you very much. So we're going to wrap the session up now. Katherine, it's been a pleasure to have you. I hope you've had a good time, and we hope our audience that you have all found this session really interesting, and thank you so much for engaging. Just as a reminder that you can find more stuff about these books on our book club resource pages on the Oxplore website to find quizzes, articles, author profiles, and much more. And please do keep an eye on our social media channels for latest updates. So that will be at Let's Oxplore on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So we hope to see you again in December, and have a lovely evening.
And thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry I was so chaotic, but I had a great time. And thank you all for reading Revelry. And Sam, thank you for asking excellent questions and facilitating such a great chat. Bye.
Thank you very much. Have a good night, all.